A country that is very much on our minds and in our hearts, the country of Iraq, in an area of great concern for all of us throughout the world at this very challenging time in the Middle East. The purpose of these smaller groupings is, first of all, to look at the situation of religious liberty in this particular country, in this particular area of the world. Secondly, to consider what might improve the situation of religious freedom in this particular area, what strategies might help. The third relates to that, and that is, what might the church or religious organizations do to assist in this challenging situation, and what might governments do to address the challenges of religious freedom in Iraq. We're very blessed in this particular workshop to have two panelists who have spent time in Iraq, are aware of the challenges that are faced regarding religious liberty and religious freedom in Iraq. First of all, Archbishop Francis Assisi Chillicut, Francis Assisi no less, who, as you know, was born in Bokati, India. And he entered the Latin Archdiocese of Arapoli in Kerala in 1978. He earned his licentiate in sacred scripture and also a doctorate in canon law, and then entered the diplomatic corps, where he had an opportunity to serve in a number of countries, in Honduras, in South Africa, in the Philippines, was involved with the Holy See Mission in New York, and then the section for relations. Okay. We're broadcasting around the whole building, I'm sorry. And of course now serves as the permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations and to the Organization of American States. As you know, Archbishop Chillicut also served as Apostolic Nuncio in 2006 in Iraq. And when Bishop Murray and I were there, I was saying that people remember him fondly and remember him well in his service there. Our second panelist is Tina Ramirez. Tina is the Director of International and Government Relations for the Beckett Fund. Prior to that, she had served as a foreign policy advisor and a person who is an expert on international religious freedom for a number of Congress people, and then organized and helped establish the Congressional International Religious Freedom Caucus, which is a bipartisan group that was founded in 2006 that has played a critical role in religious freedom, in helping people who were imprisoned for their religious beliefs, and in addressing a number of critical issues regarding religious freedom. She has visited Iraq on several occasions, is quite knowledgeable about the situation there, and has actually her background in human rights from the University of Essex in Great Britain. So I think we'll be very well informed and challenged in these two presentations, and afterward there'll be an opportunity for us to interact and to dialogue about what is the current situation in Iraq related to religious freedom, what are some strategies that might ameliorate the situation, and what might faith-based organizations, what might the church and government organizations do to improve the situation. Archbishop Chillicut.
Good afternoon, everyone. Your Eminence, Cardinal McCarrick, it is a privilege to have you here. When I was in Jordan, I think at least I met you 3 or 4 times. We even celebrated your birthday in an anticipated manner. Then afterwards, when I came to New York, we had another 3 or 4 celebrations. And Cardinal McCarrick knows very well, better than me, most of the situation, almost all the situation, I would say, in the Middle East. And he has friends in high places, starting with the kings and prime ministers and foreign ministers. And it was always a joy for me to receive Cardinal McCarrick to the Nunciature while in Jordan. At that time, because of security reasons, Cardinal could not make it to Baghdad. But he had all the good intention to come and visit not only me, but also especially the Christian community in Iraq. But I always appreciated your support, Cardinal, when I was there in Iraq and in Jordan. I would like to thank all the bishops who are present and all our distinguished guests who is this afternoon with us to talk about a little bit the situation of the Christians, mainly the Christians in Iraq, where I served a little more than 4 years. Can you hear everybody? Is it okay? I don't want to shout because somebody make it too noisy. When I was in Iraq, among the colleagues, we used to say a joke about the Iraqis, the immigration of Iraqis, and we used to say that the best job an Iraqi could aspire for is the job of a foreign ambassador, because you can get out of the country and you can live outside the country. And I will talk about it a little later during my prepared speech, because I have a landing problem. I know how to take off, but I don't know how to land. Let me also tell you, just lighten the atmosphere, another joke about the Iraqis. How do you play Iraqi bingo? It's very easy. B-52, F-16, and B-52. So just to tell you that it has not been easy to be in Iraq, not only for myself, especially for the Christian community. And when the Christians were targeted, that's where the other question came up: what is the name of the national bird of Iraq? And it's very easy: duck. And oftentimes we had to duck for safety. So, dear brothers and sisters, it is always good to be with Christians who are truly Catholic and truly universal. Your souls are rooted in Jerusalem, your minds are grounded in Rome, and your hearts, if not also your footprints, travel to all four corners of the world. As the Deuteronomist reminds us, you are a truly wise and intelligent people. There is evidence that your intelligence enables you to comprehend the intelligible realities of this world and of this universe as created by God, so as to recognize what is good and what is not, what is right and what is not, what is true and what is not. One important element of evidence of this is your solidarity with the neighbor, wherever they may be. As true Christians, you suffer and rejoice with your fellow believers everywhere. As an Arab proverb has it, only a mother can understand the suffering of a son. The church, as a mother, a true mother, understands the suffering of her sons and daughters around the world and hastens to help them the best way she can. In fact, she takes upon herself vicariously, just like her founder, Jesus Christ, all the sufferings of her children who are created after God's image and likeness. Every human being that suffers in the world is thus a person whom the church welcomes, assists, and desires passionately to redeem. It is because of this we, as disciples of Christ, go out of our way to find out what is happening in and to the body of Christ. Our gift of intelligence makes us inquire where others may be content not to do so. Your information gathering and news consuming probably once included frequent reports from Iraq. More than likely than not, this is not so much the case anymore. Nonetheless, some information still emerges from that troubled land of a great people. Still, it gets misplaced amongst all the other information that overwhelms us. Since March 23 of this year, there have not been so many reports in the media of attacks on Christians in Iraq. Are there fewer attacks than in previous years? Yes. Have things improved there? No. What has changed then? I have to say with regret that the enemies of Christianity in Iraq, as many in Iraq call them, have largely accomplished their goals. Since the news tends to report on changes, whether they be things that have happened or things that they would like to see happen, news agencies have shifted their focus to other hotspots, and especially Syria, where the horror story of Iraq is being reenacted at this very moment. The suffering of our Christian brothers and sisters in Iraq has now found new ground in Syria. Increasing hostility toward Christianity we can feel in many countries in the Middle East. Today, ensuring the right to religious freedom remains one of the greatest challenges facing our world, and it is likely only to increase in intensity. Major threats to religious freedom are surfacing with more frequency even in what many consider the great democracies of the world. There even are new terms for it. We call it Christianophobia, or otherwise we call it even as Christophobia. The hatred, discrimination, intolerance, persecution of Christians know no limit in intensity or locale. There is even evidence of this in the Western democracies, which consider themselves bastions of human rights. The recent annual hate crime report of the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe documents the growing intolerance against Christians. According to another study, 70% of the world's populations live in countries with high restrictions on religious beliefs and practices, and 51% of governments have used force against religious groups or individuals in the form of killings, physical abuse, imprisonment, detention, or displacement and destruction of personal or religious properties. Sadly, we have just seen a new display of the problem where the Cistercian monastery of Latrun outside of Jerusalem was desecrated. In his 2011 message for the World Day of Peace, Pope Benedict XVI pointed out that, and I quote, "At present, Christians are the religious group which suffers most from persecution on account of its faith. Many Christians experience daily affronts and often live in fear because of their pursuit of truth, their faith in Jesus Christ, and their heartfelt plea for respect for religious freedom. This situation, as the Holy Father puts it, is unacceptable since it represents an insult to God and to human dignity," unquote. There may be more than 200 million Christians of different confessions who are in difficulty because of legal and cultural structures that lead to their discrimination. 2010, 2011 was one of the difficult time that the Iraqi Christians had to go through. At that time, the attack on Syria Catholic Cathedral of Our Lady of Deliverance in Baghdad was still afresh in all our minds. This is a cathedral that I used to go very often because it's just within the walking distance. I needed only to cross the street in between, and I was there just about a couple of minutes walk from the nunciature. And I know it very well, this cathedral for the Archbishop and the whole community there. Every Good Friday, I used to go there for the liturgical functions in that cathedral. As you may recall, the massacre that took place in that cathedral was something beyond description. The shock of that despicable act remains still in our mind. And the Holy Father even mentioned it in his World Day of Peace message. 58 people were killed, including 2 priests whom I knew well, Father Thayer and Father Wasim, young priests, and more than 70 were killed. Not even children were spared, as they were shot dead in front of their mothers. And other tragic events marked that year as well. In order to understand what I am describing, you have to put yourself, at least mentally, in Iraq, in Baghdad, or in other different places. Then you will understand the suffering, the intensity of suffering and pain the Christians are going through there, who are left to fend for themselves by the international community at this point in time. 8 days later, 2 Christians were killed in Baghdad. More killings and bombings marked the following week. Another pair of Iraqi Christians were murdered on November 16, as well as on November 22. The first day of December saw the 8th murder of a Christian since the cathedral massacre. The next 2, an elderly couple, were slain on Sunday, December 5. On December 30, 14 bombs were placed at the homes of Christians in Baghdad. A few moments later, Sacred Heart Parish in Baghdad was bombed following Mass on Easter Sunday, 2011. I'm mentioning only a few of them. There are so many others. The result of these acts of terrorism based on religious intolerance, to nobody's surprise, was the mass exodus of thousands upon thousands of Iraqi Christians to some safer place, at least for the time. Some went west to Syria, at that time a safe haven for the Christians. And Cardinal McCarrick knows very well, I think you visited also some of the Christian communities, especially in Aleppo, where Archbishop Antoine Odo is the Chaldean Archbishop there, who did a marvelous job for the Iraqi refugee Christians there. Others were forced to relocate themselves to north toward Kurdistan. As the killings and harassment continued, Mosul and Kirkuk in the north became the venue for the persecution with greater intensity and regularity. But the church remained steadfast, not to capitulate. Her faithful knew that their discipleship means something to God and people of goodwill. In February 2011, Archbishop Bashar Warda of Erbil announced a plan to build a new Catholic hospital and a university in the northern region of Iraq. In July, Iraq's embattled Chaldean Catholic community opened a new church as well. Archbishop Louis Sacco, all these bishops I know personally very well, who presided at the dedication of St. Paul's Church in Kirkuk, said, "The Christians must continue to play an active role in the life of Iraq because isolation is a slow death." Isolation is a slow death. And I used to say that to the Iraqi bishops and priests and the lay leaders, that we got to carry on with the life, and we got to build more churches, the hospitals, so that the Christians there will see that the church is here to stay, and nobody can destroy the church in this land that belongs to them, where they lived so peacefully with the Christians and the Muslim, so peacefully with the Muslim community for so many centuries. There was also, for example, an idea of creating a new homeland, as they call it, for the Christians, for example. There also, the Christians call, that universal call to be the leaven and the salt of the earth, uh, um, was the main reason why the Christians did not want to isolate themselves in a ghetto from the rest of the Iraqi community. So, as Archbishop Louis Sacco puts it, isolation is a slow death. We need to be present there. We need to be active. We need to serve the community that we are sent to serve. And I admire the courage and dedication and commitment of the Iraqi people. In spite of the difficulties that they are going through, they are continuing to do that, and they need all our full-hearted support. Cruelly, the last reports of violence in Iraq for the year 2011 were the bombings of several churches in Kirkuk in August, the killing of Christians in Kirkuk in October, and further violence and murders in the north in December. Meanwhile, over the course of 2011, various reports were coming from Syria, which would soon be embroiled in its own turmoil. Archbishop Samir Nasser, the Maronite Archbishop of Damascus, praised the thousands of Catholics who had fled Iraq for Syria over the recent years for having revitalized the life of the church, filling churches, invigorating parishes, and reinforcing the Christian faith in Syria. Ominously, warnings about coming persecution in Syria were slowly emerging from many sources. Bishop William Shomali, Auxiliary Bishop of Jerusalem, told the Vatican Radio that he feared that a civil war in Syria could create a climate in which the nation's 1.5 million Christians would face active persecution. And I quote, "The experience of Iraq," he said, "could be for us a paradigm. We are afraid in some way of such results in Syria." As it turns out, his prediction was accurate. Over the last 8 months, the news reports about Iraqi Christians have been limited. The first involved a gun battle that unfolded in front of the residence of Archbishop of Kirkuk in January. In March, a bomb exploded and killed 2 guards at the Syrian Orthodox Church of St. Matthew in Baghdad. There was also a report of a Christian man being kidnapped and murdered in Mosul. When you talk about the Mosul, remember Archbishop Faraj Raho, who was also kidnapped, and he was found dead after 9 days. And his body was buried in a garbage bag. And this is how that archbishop died. And he has been forewarned many times, but he said, "I will never leave my people, no matter what it takes." And this is the price he had to pay. And a year before, one of his priests, Father Ragir Ghani, was also gunned down immediately after the Mass, together with the 3 deacons who were with him. And in order that nobody can go and assist this priest who was bleeding, together with the deacons, they even planted bomb around the vehicle so that nobody could approach. So these are the cruelties that the Christians are facing in Iraq. But these reports about Christianity in that part of the world tell the rest of the story, and I would limit myself to 2. In February of this year, Chaldean Catholic Bishop of Aleppo, Syria, about whom I mentioned a while ago, warned that continued violence would turn Syria into a new Iraq. He pleaded with international leaders to support a negotiated settlement rather than violence as a means of resolving Syria's political crisis. Otherwise, Christians will pay a heavy price, he said. Less than 2 months ago, the Maronite Archbishop of Damascus, Monsignor Samir Nasser, issued a dire statement, and I quote, "One lives an apocalypse in Damascus, and we hope with all our heart, mind, and strength that resurrection may soon arrive." In the dramatic testimony sent to the Fides news agency, Archbishop said, "Since Tuesday, fighting has been raging in Damascus with heavy weapons, tanks, and helicopters in a city full of civilians. The destruction is enormous. What an ordeal. The clashes are taking place in the streets and moving from one district to another. I cannot sleep for fear and for the noise of bombs and gunfire. temperature is above 40 degrees Celsius, and often there are power outages. There is insufficient supply in many areas, and we are short of bread, vegetables, cooking gas, and fuel for the furnaces. The population is terrified and does not know where to take shelter. The roads to Jordan, Iraq, Aleppo, and the north area of Homs are closed. You see a long snake of people fleeing on the road to Lebanon, an exodus that occurs in the general panic. And turning to the displaced of Damascus, Archbishop said, I hope you find a home, remembering that in the past, Assyrians welcomed the Palestinians, the Lebanese, and the Iraqis. Archbishop Nasser continued, the few faithful who had the courage to come to Mass lit many candles at the tomb of the blessed martyrs of Damascus. They exchanged greetings and tears in fear of seeing each other for the last time before returning home between gunfire and explosions. The violence that has torn the other cities of Syria has been spared in Damascus. Now it is our turn to suffer and die. We have just built a shelter under the stairs to escape the bombs, and the cellars of the parish have been cleared up. It is an apocalypse. We hope that resurrection arrives soon after much suffering. Unquote. As you can see, dear brothers and sisters, Christians are abandoned to their tragic destiny and are left to fend for themselves. Believe me, there are not many to take the side of the Christians today. As witnessed in Iraq and in some other countries, the intention of the extremists is to wipe out Christianity from their lands. The attacks in Mosul in 2008 and 2009, and the October 2010 siege of the Syriac Catholic Cathedral in Baghdad are just a few obvious examples of this hideous strategy. In both cities, it became apparent that Islamic extremists were seeking the removal of the country's Christian presence. Such fundamentalists are spurred on by the fact that when they wish to see what they wish to see happen is already close to coming to pass. It is no exaggeration to say that in the past 150 years, an exodus of Christians on a truly biblical scale has taken place in many parts of the Middle East, including, unfortunately, from the Holy Land. Cardinal McCarrick knows about it. There is not even a year where there was an increase in the Christian population in the Holy Land. In some cases, this has happened within a generation. Iraq, however, is by far the most serious. At the time of the last census in 1987, the country was home to 1.4 million Christians. By the beginning of 2003, that figure had fallen to 800,000. By the beginning of 2011, the media was giving 500,000 as the country's Christian population, but leading Catholic prelates in Iraq have told that the real figure could be as low as 200 to 300,000 Christians. Of those still in Iraq, many, if not most, are living as displaced people, desperate to join family and friends in neighboring countries before traveling to the West. If you want to see an Iraqi community that has migrated to the United States, go to Detroit. There's a place called, I can't recall at this point in time the real name, but you can see the Iraqi community there, well established, and they are really trying to make a new life, begin a new life in the United States. As Blessed John Paul II once affirmed, recourse to violence in the name of religious belief is a perversion of the very teachings of the major religions. And on this topic, we recall also what many religious leaders have repeated so often. The use of violence can never claim a religious justification, nor can it foster the growth of true religious feeling. This requires that religious leaders firmly and unequivocally condemn all acts of violence in the name of religion as the antithesis of religion. The problem of religious violence raises another question. It is time to consider the particularities of religious persecution when it comes at the hands of the devout followers of Islam. If we do not raise the issue in a knowledgeable, responsible, and respectful manner, then it will remain the domain of those filled with hate, whether it be of Muslims in particular or of religious believers in general. The enemies of religion will always see in religion one of the principal sources of violence, and so they will demand that it disappear. Even though I have focused on one religion of the world, I think it more than possible that those opposed to religious freedom elsewhere in the world can be fortified by the events in the Middle East. Here, Pope Benedict XVI cautions that when consideration of God is obscured, it is the meaning of human existence itself that is obscured. In this regard, Blessed John Paul II asserted consistently throughout his pontificate that it is only in the mystery of the Word made flesh that the mystery of man truly becomes clear. We know only too well from the history that the denial of God has led to much cruelty and to a degree of violence that knows no bounds, which only becomes possible when a person no longer recognizes any judge above himself, now having only himself as an arbiter. The horrors of the concentration camps that existed in Europe have existed elsewhere, reveal with utter clarity the consequences of God's absence. The denial of God by man corrupts man, robs him of his reasoning, his dignity, and leads him to violence. Godless societies, politics, and policies lead ultimately to the abolition of the human being. But there is an antidote to this problem. When believers rightly live in relationship with God, religion becomes a force for peace, harmony, and brotherhood. Denial of God will lead to denial of man. Abolition of God will ultimately lead to the abolition of man. Having been rendered in his likeness and image, man needs to connect with God, his source and destiny. As St. Augustine so eloquently put it, "Great are you, O Lord, your power is immense, and your wisdom beyond reckoning. You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." As Apostolic Nuncio to Iraq, I witnessed the heartbreaking stories of terror and the relentless tragedies faced by the Christian communities. These modern-day martyrs of faith must not be forgotten. A part of my responsibility to this day, as one stood shoulder to shoulder with them, is to keep the memory of them, their persecution, their sacrifice, in front of the world's conscience and consciousness. But the 20th century showed that the memory of tragedies does not guarantee that future generations will be protected or spared from such tragedies of violence, cruelty, and hatred. Let us not think that the incidents of religious cleansing will always belong to distant lands, as I have already suggested, because someday the same fateful episodes could appear in our own land, in your own land, unless you rise up now for the rights of our beleaguered brothers and sisters in those distant lands and nations. They too belong to our common family, which we call the church. By defending their rights, we shall be defending our own rights. Ignoring the violation of their rights would mean ignoring and surrendering our own. And before I conclude, I would like to acknowledge and encourage the work being done by the bishops and the faithful Catholic leaders in the United States to make certain that religious freedom is respected and upheld in this country and around the world. And this panel discussion is one of those moments that the bishops have decided to bring consciousness and awareness into the hearts and mind of those people who want to really defend those undefended and helpless Christians in those countries in the Middle East. I can assure you that from the vantage point of my present duties at the United Nations, I know there is a true and proper course that we can take. We have to stand up and speak out and defend the rights of those people who are voiceless, defenseless there, and living there representing each and every one of us. Those persecuted Christians, those suffering Christians, those Christians who are giving their utmost, even the ultimate sacrifice that they make for us, means to say that they are our spokespersons in those countries, even though they are minority. As I said before, they belong to the big family we call the church. So they are not alone. I used to tell them, you are not alone. You belong to that big family, which is a church, so we are with you. But is that enough to say what we have to also show in concrete gestures that we are with them? And I am so happy that Bishop Kikanis last year went with the delegation from the Bishops' Conference to show that sympathy and solidarity to the Iraqi community Christians there. And I'm sure that they truly appreciated that. When I was nuncio there, I've been working on that. But when I came back here, in fact, that was one of the first things I asked the Bishops' Committee to make this delegation trip to Iraq possible, and to go and visit the Christian communities, starting from Baghdad, where the Christians are living in a difficult situation. And that kind of a visit will really strengthen their morale as well as their faith. And when they see that they are supported by the Christian communities from other countries, they will have greater courage to remain there, continue to remain there, and to live the faith. The statement on religious liberty published by the Ad hoc Committee for Religious Liberty of its Bishops' Conference, USCCB, is a telling example of how, as in the past, the bishops of this noble country are determined to discharge their solemn duty to related to religious liberty, the most cherished of American freedoms, which is sadly under attack at this time, as Pope Benedict XVI recently stated on the occasion of the ad limina visit of the U.S. bishops. And on their part, the U.S. bishops themselves said, and I quote, "Religious liberty requires constant vigilance and protection, or it will disappear." In his 1991 encyclical, Centesimus Annus, Blessed John Paul II reminds us that totalitarianism attempts to destroy the church, or at least to reduce her to submission, making her an instrument of its own ideological apparatus. But he further noted that this threat is not solely expressed by the state established on dictatorship or a democracy without values, for a democracy without values easily turns into open or thinly disguised totalitarianism. Since the conclusion of the Second World War and the formation of the United Nations, democracies around the world have periodically exhibited traits of this new totalitarianism that emerges from a democracy without values. Authentic religious freedom that is robust is the precise antidote to this poisonous transformation. I love to quote on this issue Christopher Dawson, who came to America later in life, but who came into the Catholic faith in his early adulthood. He still reminds us that the modern state, even the democratic one, can exert terrible pressure on religious freedom. He insightfully warned already as early as the 1950s that the modern democratic state can join the totalitarian one in not being satisfied with passive obedience, but it demands full cooperation from the cradle to the grave. In addition, he eloquently noted the challenges that secularism and secular societies can pose to Christians on the cultural as well as the political levels. And he warned that if Christians cannot assert their right to exist, then they will eventually be pushed not only out of modern culture, but out of physical existence. And he acknowledged that this was not only a problem in the totalitarian or non-democratic states, but it could also happen in the United States of America or in England if we do not use our opportunities while we still have them. I thank you for your attention, and God bless you all.
We're certainly very grateful for your moving words that touch the heart and your vivid description of some of the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Iraq and in the Middle East, and that we need to stand up and speak out about what we've seen. Tina, welcome, and we look forward to your thoughts.
Thank you. I hope you don't mind if I stay down here. You might be able to hear me a little bit better. Okay. Can everybody hear me? All right. Well, first of all, thank you to the bishops and all the organizers of this conference for having me here, for raising the profile of religious freedom issues, and not only on Iraq, but on Nigeria and the other countries that are being discussed here today. This is such an important topic. It's something that's important for religious believers and people of no faith to come together on, because it really does affect each one of us and the dignity that we all have as human beings. When I was in Iraq a few years ago, I had an opportunity to meet a man through one of the bishops that had contacted me, and the man's name is Alex Turkanian. And this man really, I just want to start out with his story, because I think it encapsulates so much of what we're here to discuss today. Alex he was an Armenian Christian, not a particularly strong Christian. He wasn't really very religious at all. He just happened to be Armenian and a Christian. And he worked as one of the top national security advisors to the Parliament of Iraq. And about 2 to 3 years ago, he was let go from his position by the former Speaker of Parliament, because when the former Speaker was leaving his position, he wanted to stack it with people from his own, I believe it was a Sunni party. And so he got rid of Alex, the only of one of 7 national security advisors that was a Christian, and replaced him with somebody of his own religious and ethnic group. Alex had to make a decision at that point. He could have done what most people who have been discriminated against in Iraq that are Christians or of other minority faith communities do, which is just to go to a different part, to find a different job, to try to survive as best you can, but to feel despair that you really can't challenge the system or win, and that there's nothing you can do, or to even feel isolated and unable to fight for his own rights. But he made a decision that he was going to challenge this. And in doing so, he risked his life, his wealth. He risked everything. But he made a very bold and courageous decision. So last year, and I've known Alex throughout this process of him challenging the government of Iraq on this discrimination case, and it was an extremely difficult road for him to take. But throughout it, I was getting to know him. I was working with our State Department, working with Congress to try to raise attention on this case, to make sure that people were following it and caring, and that we weren't just ignoring what was happening, but that we were standing beside him, essentially. And what happened was his lawyer ended up going to court, and Alex had to flee the Baghdad at the time, because the former speaker put out a lot of press against him to have people attack him. So it was very unsafe for him. His family was in danger. So he fled just for the time being while the trial took place. But the lawyer was too afraid to actually show up. So he told Alex he was going to go, but he ended up not going. And so the case was dismissed and he lost it. But he decided, I'll just go and defend myself. If they kill me, they kill me. So he decided to appeal the case. As he was appealing it, the new Speaker of Parliament was finally brought in. As you know, there was this huge gap for a while, a couple years ago. And the new Speaker told Alex, why don't you let your case go, and then I will do an investigation. Alex thought, okay, it's worth a try. So the current Speaker did an investigation, and they weren't really expecting him to actually be fair, but what happened is that he actually was, and he found that there was, that Alex was clearly discriminated against, that there was this completely made up story, essentially, that masked everything that had happened in trying to force Alex out as a Christian, and it was very clearly because he was a Christian that he was being forced out. During this whole time, dozens of other Christians in senior positions within ministries of education and other ministries throughout the government of Iraq were being forced out as well. So it wasn't just Alex, and he knew that if he didn't stand up, who was going to stand up? None of them had the power to stand up. Alex had a British passport, so he thought, well, at least if I do it, I might be risking my life and everything, but I know I can always try to escape or get to the UK. And these people, they can't. They would have to go through the visa process and flee somewhere else or get stuck in Syria or Lebanon or wherever, and that's a disaster for most of them. I mean, it's extremely difficult. So the report came back saying that this was, in fact, a case of discrimination. And it was great. We were ecstatic because here, the first case to actually prove that, in fact, there was entrenched bureaucratic discrimination against religious minority community in Iraq. And so we thought, okay, well, then maybe they're going to do something. If they were actually willing to go to that extent of actually showing that there was discrimination, maybe that's a positive step. And so we didn't celebrate too soon, and we couldn't because, unfortunately, Alex had, when he went back to find out what they were going to do, they decided to force him into early retirement. And so the hundreds of thousands of dollars that he put out on his own to defend himself, to protect himself, to survive for those couple of years when he was fighting this challenge, basically he didn't get anything back. He was forced into early retirement, and then he had to flee the country because of the threats on him and his wife. And he went to Lebanon, and in Lebanon, he thought that he could at least go back to the United Kingdom, so he applied for his wife to come back with him. And the United Kingdom said, well, you're unemployed, so how would you take care of your non-British wife? So you can come back, but she can't. So, persecuted, standing up, one of the few people to stand up, this sign of hope, and then because you're persecuted, and that's why you lost your job, well, you can't come back to the country that you have a passport from. Unfortunately, the former speaker is also a British citizen, and he's welcome back anytime he wants. This is the situation that so many people in Iraq face daily, whether it's sitting on a bus and getting a letter saying that you can't come back to work. If you do, we will kill you. Walking to church. It even affects Shias and Sunnis probably more than religious minorities, just in a different way. It's not proportionally as prominent, but Shias and Sunnis on religious holidays are constantly attacked within their mosques and religious holy sites simply because the other political party or ethnic community or religious community wants to get back for the Saddam era years. So, but for minorities like Alex, the Armenians, the Chaldeans, the Syriacs, the Assyrians, the Yazidis, the Mandaeans, the Kakai, the Shabak, for all of these different minority ethnic and religious communities, it's a daily struggle, and it's a life and death struggle. And Alex decided that he wanted to stand up for all those people that weren't going to be able to stand up on their own. The hope in all of that story is that Alex is actually going back to Baghdad now, and he's been hanging out in Armenia, but he's going back, and he's actually going to try to run for parliament probably. And I think that there's hope there. And so I don't want it to be so much despair. I actually want to talk about the hope, but I say that because this is a life and death reality for most minority ethnic and religious communities within Iraq. For the dominant majority communities, they're attacked, Sunnis and Shias, by each other. But the difference is, and we could add Kurds to that grouping as well, the difference between Kurds, Sunnis, Shias is that they have political parties and militias that defend them. The minority groups have no one. So they have some political representation, but it's not enough. And not only that, but they're extremely disadvantaged in a number of different ways that are roadblocks to their ability to have the dignity that they deserve within Iraq. And I want to talk briefly about what these roadblocks are and then how we can address them. One of the important things is it's clear that Iraq has been on this road to freedom and dignity for a very long time. And if we can identify what those roadblocks to getting them there are, and I think the roadblocks are pretty clear, then we can know what we need to do to address those to actually make a difference and not spend the next 10 years talking about more deaths of these minority ethnic and religious communities getting wiped off essentially the map of Iraq, which is what the trajectory is at this point. So the roadblocks. For Alex, as for many people in Iraq, the law does not protect equality amongst religious and ethnic communities. There's a huge disparity. There's a supremacy clause in the Constitution. There are the structure of the judicial system. Everything is set up in such a way that it precedents, or that it allows for Islam as a source of law to dominate the system. The problem with that is that entrenched in that is a bias against minority ethnic communities. They only recognize 4 actual minority ethnic communities. The rest of them are not recognized at all. So there's this entrenched inequality. Baha'is are actually illegal in Iraq. So for Baha'is, they have absolutely no rights. And for many of them, they've had to live in hiding for the past 3 decades and for the 3 decades under Saddam and the last decade that the United States has been there, most of them have actually fled Baghdad and gone into Kurdistan, where they're hoping for more freedom. But these legal barriers are huge, and I mention them first because the legal barriers are some of the strongest roadblocks for individual human dignity. And if they are not addressed first and foremost, you will never have a government that will have the red lines in place that they know they need to defend. And so the problems that we see that were spoken of just a few minutes ago, of violence and discrimination against the religious minority communities, particularly the Christians, are a result of a lack of specific provisions defining and protecting religious freedom and equality for all people throughout Iraq. Now, if we had that, then there would be something to enforce. Well, right now we have very confusing laws, and we have no implementation, no enforcement. So the other roadblocks are lack of security. If you go into a number of Christians and other minorities have left Iraq altogether and fled to, I mean Iraq proper, not the Kurdish area. They've left Basra, Baghdad, a number of cities in the south, and fled to Kurdistan, or then fled to Syria, Lebanon, etc. And usually Kurdistan is just a stopping point on the way out as far as they can get. In the Constitution, it left the boundaries between Kurdistan and Iraq vague. Because of that, unfortunately, that means that there's a lot of insecurity, instability, uncertainty for a lot of the religious minority communities that are going back to their lands within the north. So the Assyrians, the Syriacs. I visited a Chaldean church. It's the Church of the East. It was the original Christian church within that part of Mesopotamia, essentially, for a number of years. The St. Harmuz monastery is on top of it. It has these tombs for the martyrs that defended the faith, that overlook the land below. And when you go there, the communities essentially tell you that they're just there to wait until they can get out. That's no way for people to live. Essentially, it's living in isolation until they can get to freedom. But the boundaries, they're in the Nineveh Plains, and so that's part of the problem, is that those areas are disputed right now. They're also sitting on a lot of oil, and so there's a huge political back and forth that's going on with the Iraqi government because of that. So because the law was unclear in settling the boundaries between Kurdistan and Iraq and the other areas of Iraq in the Constitution, there's never been a census. All of these issues have created a lot of instability, uncertainty for those people in the areas along the border. In Kirkuk and Mosul, like was spoken of earlier, there's very little security, and there never has been. And the reason is because those are in disputed areas that are fought over constantly between the Kurds and the Iraqi central government. And many people living in those areas feel like they're just pawns. They're just basically small people without anyone to defend themselves, living amidst these two huge entities of Iraq and the Kurds, and they're constantly like a ball that's being juggled back and forth between them. That's essentially how they live and how they feel. So in the Nineveh Plains, you have ancient Christian communities, you have the Jewish tomb of the prophet Nahum, you have some Jewish members in Kurdistan, but there were around 30 Jewish people in Baghdad before the war began, now there's 7. There's 7. So that's it. I mean, and the history of these people in these border areas and their ability to survive is so limited. So you have boundary disputes between there that need to be addressed, particularly in those areas. And then if you talk about in Iraq, another barrier for these people is terrorism. But security and terrorism go hand in hand. So without security, terrorists will continue to exacerbate the problem, and that's what's happening. So in an area in the Nineveh Plains called Karakosh, some convent of nuns was completely bombed a few years ago. I forget exactly when it was. And it hasn't been able to rebuild, but they've been trying to build a hospital to actually remain. And they've been unable to do it so far, but hopefully soon they will. But in this area of Karakosh, it's just one more example of the lack of security, being in outskirts of Mosul, not being able to defend itself. There's no protection. And so will they be able to build their hospital? Will they not? Will they be able to remain? It's all uncertain. Their ability to live in dignity is uncertain because there's no security in terrorism. The government discrimination I mentioned with Alex's case, that's another roadblock. And that's an entrenched roadblock that is pervasive throughout the government with the amount of teachers that are hired. I mean, I don't want to get into all the details because there's just too many of them. Another obstacle to many people there is simply economic opportunity. The fact is that many stores are attacked. For the Mandaean community, a number of them had gold shops in the south of Iraq. And because of this, they were attacked for their wealth. And so the Mandaean community, which have to live around rivers, were unable to survive in the south simply because they were being attacked for their wealth, for their beliefs. So they had to flee and they're dispersed. They don't believe in defending themselves. They're pacifists. So they were even more attacked because of that. They also don't proselytize. They don't convert into other faiths, or they don't convert other people into their faith. So their community is being so dwindled. They had 55,000 people when the war began. Now they're down to around 4,000 in their community in Iraq. I mean, that's a significant reduction of people. But these are the types of attacks, from economic disaster to terrorism to discrimination. You can also look at the political pressure and the lack of representation in the government. That's rampant. People throughout Iraq as well as throughout Kurdistan are intimidated to belong to certain political parties in order to survive. This is another major problem. I mentioned the boundary disputes in the land, the issue that needs to be resolved. That's another roadblock. There are a couple of others that I want to mention. One is the internal-external displacement. The inability to stay in their communities is forcing people into internal exile as well as external exile. And so that is simply a roadblock to being able to live as who they are in their traditional homeland. Their holy sites are being attacked. Their economic opportunities are being attacked. Everything's being attacked, so they can't survive there. Going back then to, if these are the roadblocks and we see them very clearly, how do we address them? Because it's very easy when you look at Iraq to become despondent and to despair, because we think, well, what could we really do? Well, I think the number one thing that we need to do is we need to stand beside people like Alex or the other Christians and religious communities that are there, so that they don't despair and that they know that they can stand up for their rights and challenge them. If they can't, within their own system, challenge their rights and try to build a better legal system to address these legal roadblocks and obstacles, then there really isn't any hope. And then on top of it, there's a security issue, which really covers a lot of the other issues, and that's security, impunity, and a number of other things that need to be addressed at the governmental level. And that's something that we all need to work with our own government to begin to address. One of the things that can be done very specifically, besides changing the laws and addressing those, coming alongside the communities there to address them from within, and then for the U.S. government or other governments to address them from without, is something that was mentioned earlier, where the Catholic bishops actually traveled to Iraq. If we had a coalition of world leaders, let's say Tony Blair, for instance, world leaders going to Iraq and making a statement that the ability of everybody to believe here is the key to the freedom of the whole country, if they made that kind of a statement, if that was a red line, if that was something that we discussed and talked about, it wouldn't just save Iraq. It would save Syria. It would save Egypt. It would save every other country in the region that's struggling with the exact same issues. And what the bishop said is absolutely right. I was in Syria in August of 2010, so just months before the Egyptian revolution. And as I was meeting with members of the church there, and I also met with them in Lebanon, other places, they all said, look, it's just a matter of time. We've gone through several waves of persecution where we were eradicated, essentially. We've hung on. We're a remnant, but it's only a matter of time before we won't be able to remain. And so if we want, and they were even more worried because of what happened in Iraq, and they didn't want that to happen to themselves, but that's exactly what's happening. So if we don't get it right in Iraq, if we just ignore it and move on to Syria or Egypt or Iran or whatever the next situation is, without going back and saying, this is a red line for us, these roadblocks must be addressed. They can be addressed. These people are worth it. We're going to stand beside them and not allow the governments to allow impunity and injustice in the face of the legal system to allow them to be eradicated within these areas that are their ancient homeland. There will be no future for the Middle East unless there's a future for the minorities that live there. That is the most important thing that we need to know. And I think that's what we need to articulate to the people there so that they know that their freedom, that their hopes are dependent on the freedom and hopes of the smallest minorities that live there. So I think I went over my time, so I'm going to end there, but thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. There's certainly been some rich input, and sadly, we're almost at the end of our time. Virginia Ferris is our secretary and has been recording some of the key insights from Archbishop Chillicott and from Tina, and hopefully that will be beneficial to the larger group. We have time for maybe one or two quick questions and short responses. Please, if you would say your name and maybe what organization you're with, and we'll proceed.
My name is John Flink. I'm with the International Catholic Migration Commission and ICMC. We have just a little background. We have a mandate from Holy See to try to help coordinate migration activities from the Catholic point of view throughout the world, and are members of the Bishops' Conference. We, as ICMC, we sort of are the Band-Aid to try to help with the refugees that are coming through. We have programs in Jordan and Lebanon and also in Syria. And one of the main concerns that we have at this point is, in fact, first you have the Iraqi refugees who had to seek refuge in other countries. And now those refugees who, for instance, have gone into Syria are now, what do they do? I mean, this is you can imagine that they're trying to do something with that. And so, in fact, what the interesting thing I was asking about them the other day is that they said that they were afraid to leave Syria because they didn't want to get out of their place in line in terms of trying to get out to another third country. But another thing that the difference Colonel McCarrick was saying earlier when we were chatting privately is somehow there needs to be some kind of dialogue also amongst Muslims of good faith that we can try to depend on. And then my last question is, what can practically be done to change the law and constitution in these countries? Is it simply pressure from the U.S. government?
Okay. And very briefly.
Okay, well, to answer the refugee question first, a friend of mine had dinner with somebody from the State Department that handles Iraqi refugee issues, and they didn't know that my friend had a connection to me, of course. He was a spy in some ways, but the person essentially said over dinner, you know, I wish people would the Congress would just realize that Iraqi Christians aren't the only refugees in the world. We're getting kind of tired of it. And sadly, that's the attitude that they have. There is a backlog. Even somebody like Senator Levin, a Democratic senator, has had a problem trying to get his own constituents in Michigan through this process. And so it's something that Congress, in a bipartisan way, is very concerned about, and that the administration is not doing enough to address. There are there's just a backlog issue in a lot of ways, but there are other issues as well. And I just don't think it's a priority, which it should be. But it is unfortunate. As far as the laws go, there are very few really specific legal changes that need to be made, and I don't know how the Iraqi government will get there without a large coalition effort internationally to call on them to make those specific legal changes. They relate to their international commitments as well as other things, but.
Thank you. I know we're all very grateful to our panelists and for their fine input. I know we're going to have to stop. The doors are being invaded. And we're going to regather at 4:30 to hear a summary from each of the three groups. Thank you. And we'll be in this room next door.